Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, your host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is August the 14th, 2024. It has been 3,852 days since Russia started covert military operations in Crimea, 10 years and 174 days since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, 2 years and 172 days since Russia expanded its war of aggression, and 9 days since Ukraine counter-invaded Russia. Today's podcast covers the events that happened on Tuesday and Wednesday morning. You will find the Russia-Ukraine war map helpful to visualize the areas discussed. There is a link in the podcast description. Once again, there are a lot of map updates today. Hello, new listeners! I record 5 days a week from the Kyiv region, and I deeply appreciate your trust and support. The Russia-Ukraine War Report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands north, south and east of Ukraine, open source intelligence, our in-house team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian mail bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission, the truth, because the truth matters. Here is my daily assessment. There aren't a lot of changes from yesterday, so if you want to skip ahead, I won't mind. I won't even know. 1. We maintain that there is an elevated and continuous risk of Russia intentionally targeting civilians in Ukraine due to the ongoing Kursk offensive. 2. We maintain Russia will restart sustained attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure by October, continuing Russian crimes against humanity that started in October 2022. As outlined in 4 arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court. 3. At this time, we maintain that Ukrainian forces do not have enough resources to defend Toretsk and New York and the approaches to Pokrovsk and Selidova. 4. At this time, we maintain that Russia will achieve the operational goal of capturing Toretsk and New York in 2024. And we further assess that for Ukrainian forces, an extended battle in an urban environment is ill-advised. 5. Despite the battlefield situation, Russian losses of armor, mobility and personnel continue at an unsustainable level. 6. The Russian economy is weaker than reported. 7. Persistent delays in the delivery of promised military hardware, munitions and funding continue to prevent the Ukrainian armed forces from reaching their full combat potential. 8. The world is caught in the mutually assured destruction instability paradox. 9. The policies of escalation management implemented by the NATO alliance and the United States, and to a small extent Germany, are a failure and have proven to be ill-conceived. 10. We assess that the United States, Germany and the leadership of the NATO alliance are shifting their policies on escalation after Moscow's muted response to Ukraine's Kursk offensive. 11. The attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have incrementally increased the chance of an intentional nuclear accident at multiple nuclear power plants. We're still doing split reports, which means that some sections, such as Theaterwide and Molbek's mobilization and Mir, are still on pause. The whole team appreciates your understanding as we work overtime to cut through the fog of war. Today, I start with the action report summary. Yesterday, Russia carried out 134 discrete assaults, and through August the 13th, the 7-day moving average for daily attacks was unchanged, holding at 113. The VKS, that's the Russian Aerospace Forces, carried out 81 airstrikes, dropping 116 bombs on civilian and military targets in Ukraine. Russian ground forces conducted almost 4,600 fire missions using tubed and barrel artillery. Last night, Russian forces launched 23 Shahed 136 one-way drones at Ukraine, including from the Kursk Oblast. Air defense shot down 17. Really quick assessment. The pattern used by Russia suggests they were testing air defense, and we believe that a larger attack is likely in the next 1 to 3 days. Let's go into the details of what happened on the battlefield. This would be a good time to open up the war map on a second device and find the city of Sumy, that's in the northeastern part of Ukraine. There is a link to the map in the podcast description. Ready? Here we go. The most active region is in Russia, as Ukraine's counter-invasion enters the 9th day. At the end of day 8, Ukraine controls 769.5 square kilometers of Russia. Another 360.5 square kilometers are Russian claimed as under Ukrainian control or in the grey area. The entire area is 1,130 square kilometers, 3.77% of the Kursk Oblast. The breach is 73.4 kilometers wide. The Ukrainian advance is confirmed at 28 kilometers in depth and is up to 35 kilometers. We find it amusing that Russian propagandists report that the invasion has been stopped and then release videos which confirm showing Ukrainian forces advancing deeper and deeper. It's like 2022 all over again. In the Tetkino area of operation, or EO, the Ukrainian Air Force bombed a Russian logistics node in Tetkino. Russian sources insist that Ukrainian forces hold a substantial reserve near the border and will open a new front in this region. Online claims that Ukrainian forces occupied Korenevo were false. In the Korenevo EO, fighting continued in eastern Korenevo. Russian sources reported that fighting continued in Tolpino and claimed Ukrainian forces had reached Alexandrovka and Vetrina. There were multiple reports that Ukrainian forces captured Lgovka and recaptured Krymiania, but without evidence. We expanded the grey area to include Krymiania and made no changes to Lgovka. Ukrainian forces were visually confirmed in eastern Zhuravli. We updated the map, putting the settlement and the village of Kalinov into the grey area. Russian mail blogger Anatoly Radov claimed, without evidence, that Ukraine captured Krasnooktyabrskaya again. Many Russian sources claimed Snagost was captured, also without evidence, while others claimed that fighting was ongoing. Despite significant cloud cover, Sentinel-2 EO browser low-resolution satellite imagery showed combat-related fires in the northwestern part of the village. Based on the new information, we adjusted the map. There were new reports of fighting in Gordievka. Based on the new intelligence and other information, we moved Troitskaya, Внезапная and Byakhovo to the grey area. In the Lgov operational direction, there were new geolocations that provided clarity on the situation. We placed the village of Kauchuk and the ground line of communication, or GLOC, that's a supply line, to Zelený Shlях as Ukrainian-controlled due to their continuous presence. Over the last 8 days, none of the recorded attacks on Ukrainian troops have involved Russian ground forces. Ukrainian forces were visually confirmed near Otradnaya, Semenovka and east of Alexeyevsky. That's over 28 kilometers from the 1991 border crossing at Sudzha. Our confidence that Ukrainian forces are using the Sudzha-Lgov highway as a GLOC has diminished, and we adjusted the map to show the Russian claimed advances to Kromsky Byky, Durovo-Bobrik and Isakovka are coming from the confirmed supply line. NASA Fire Information for Resource Management Systems, or FIRMS, showed new fires in Kromsky Byky, suggesting that fighting was ongoing in the settlement. South of Lgov, from Selektsionni to the outskirts of Nizhnie Derevenki, Sentinel-2 browser low-resolution satellite imagery showed Russian forces were building defensive structures along the E38 highway. Ukrainian forces are 18 kilometers away, and if Russian commanders believe they won't be able to hold Ukrainian forces back, they are preparing to cede almost 25% of the oblast. In breaking news, Ukrainian news agency TSN arrived in Sudzha, confirming that the settlement is under full administrative control of Ukraine. There was little damage within the city, although TSN reported that Russia had started airstrikes. Ukraine has strict press rules when declaring an area has been administratively cleared. The presence of TSN in the eastern part of Sudzha suggests Ukrainian forces have advanced at least 5 to 10 kilometers in all directions. Ukraine announced the start of a non-combatant evacuation operation from the Kursk region, starting in Sudzha. Civilians who want to be evacuated from the combat zone will be moved in groups on Tuesdays, Thursdays and Saturdays. Ukrainian volunteer worker Denis Hristov said that those with qualifications who want to assist can contact him directly. Remember, Russian propagandists keep saying the advances have stopped, and only hours ago Aptia Laudinov, the leader of Chechen Ahmad forces, insisted fighting was still happening in Sudzha. In the Sudzha AO, there was a new visual confirmation of Ukrainian troops west of Russkaya Porechная. To the south, we coded the village of Kositsa as Russian claimed Ukrainian occupied. Ukrainian forces advancing on the R200 highway reached Berdin, where fighting was ongoing. We extended the area controlled by Ukraine and coded Berdin as contested. Further south, on the R200 highway, Russian sources claimed without evidence that Ukraine captured Kruglik. Ukrainian and Russian sources reported Ukraine reoccupied Martinovka, and based on our analysis and the confirmation that Ukrainian forces are fighting north of Martinovka, we coded the settlement as under Ukrainian control, again. Russian sources claimed Ukraine occupied Kalmakov, which we moved to the grey zone. Claims by Russian mercenary ML blogger Rybar that Ukrainian forces were pushed out of the hamlet of Dmitriukov were false. We should have known better, and we coded the village as Ukrainian-controlled. Northeast of Sudzha, Russian officials announced the mandatory evacuation of the Bolshosoldatsky district. Over the weekend, Russian sources reported fighting in the area of Bolshoye Soldatskaya and the capture of Kukuy. In the Belitsa AO, a large formation of Ukrainian mechanized infantry moved through Plekhovo and took pictures at the Palace of Culture. Residents watched the troops pass, with one shouting, "Slava Ukraini!" There have been no protests, no attacks by local residents, or signs of partisan activity. In contrast, on February 25, 2022, the Ukrainian government was handing out guns, and civilians were carrying out ambushes of Russian troops without the military, towing away stuck armored vehicles with farm tractors, changing highway signs, and mass-producing Molotov cocktails. Geolocated video confirmed that Ukrainian forces have military control of Krupets, and heavy fighting was ongoing in Kamyshnaya, where Russia has pulled up artillery. Based on the new information, we adjusted the map. Russian sources claimed that, quote, cleansing operations were still ongoing in Girye, and NASA firms suggested that fighting was ongoing northwest of the settlement. Rybar claimed that a, quote, cleansing operation was ongoing in Ozerki, indicating that Ukrainian forces advanced to the village. We assessed the Ukrainian advance came from Gaptarovka, but it is possible that Ukrainian troops advanced south from Barki. Based on Rybar's claim, we expanded the grey area. autocrat Vladimir Putin has changed the commander of the Kursk defense 3 times in 24 hours, plunging the command structure into chaos. Major changes to the Russian chain of command can take 7 to 14 days to stabilize because Moscow uses a top-down command structure. Field officers are not enabled to make independent decisions on the battlefield in the tactical situation changes. Putin's year-long purge of the Ministry of Defense, coupled with the Federal Security Service, or FSB, taking command of the defense, has probably created even more issues. With 3 senior command changes in 24 hours, subordinates will be reluctant to show disloyalty to their former chain of command, while wanting to gain support from the new commander in control. Politically, it's high stakes, as perceived disloyalty can end in arrest or being sent to the front lines of Ukraine. Russian units that have been hastily removed from Kaliningrad and occupied Kharkiv, Donetsk, Zaporizhia and Kherson oblasts report no cohesive command structure and non-existent communications between units. The only exception appears to be Chechen Akhmat and elements of the 810th Guards Naval Infantry Brigade. In another sign that Russia is facing military hardware shortages, the illegitimate self-declared president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, announced he gave instructions to the Ministry of Defense to transfer equipment to Russia. Moscow already raided Belarus's weapons storage in late 2022, including large-caliber ammunition. Ukrainian forces likely have another 7 to 10 days before Moscow can mount a more organized defense. An indication of Putin's paranoia? Roadblocks, identical to the ones after the Crocus Theatre terrorist attack in March, have been deployed on some roads that lead into Moscow as part of increased security. Russian officials are concerned that Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance units, DRG, could infiltrate the Russian capital. The Russian 28th Battalion, 60th Motor Rifle Brigade command post somewhere in the Kursk Oblast, was captured by Ukrainian forces. The command staff left so quickly that they failed to destroy documents, radios, computers and electronic devices. Ukrainian forces continue to capture large numbers of Russian troops, including members of the 11th Kaliningrad Army Corps, the 9th Motor Rifle Regiment, the 200th Arctic Motor Rifle Brigade, and the 15th Petnashka Volunteer Brigade. Yesterday, the acting head of the Kursk Regional Administration, Alexander Shmatkov, resigned from his position. He was recently appointed the deputy head of the Federal Road Agency. He will work for his former boss, previous Kursk Oblast Governor Roman Starovoyt, who was named the new Minister of Transport of Russia in May 2024. That's the same guy that spent $172 million on static defense that Ukraine breached like they weren't there. In the city of Kursk, with up to 121,000 people evacuated and another 80,000 under orders, lines for humanitarian aid, housing, food and medical assistance are growing, as is frustration. The Ministry of Emergency Situations announced they were setting up 10 cities that can accommodate up to 30,000 people. Evacuees complained that Russian railways had increased the price of tickets to Moscow, which was defended due to excessive cancellation of tickets and tourists stuck in some areas. Others claimed they were notified there would be no 10,000 ruble one-time payment to evacuees, as promised by autocrat Vladimir Putin. Wait, it gets worse. Much worse. The founder of private military company Paladin, Georgy Zakrevsky, released a video criticizing the Russian government for the failure of the so-called special military operation and the, quote, collapse of the army. In a message that echoed deceased PMC Wagner leader Yevgeny Prigozhin, Zakrevsky said, quote, "The point of no return has already been passed. We need to save the country," and called for others to join him in forming a new march to Moscow. The video has been authenticated, and Zakrevsky formed PMC Paladin in 2023. He has been a vocal critic of the Russian government. He appears to be cut from the same cloth as Prigozhin and our favorite FSB colonel, convicted war criminal, convicted Russian criminal, failed mobbing, and original leader of the Little Green Man in the Donbass, Igor Strelkov-Girkin. The spokesperson for the Foreign Ministry of Ukraine, Georgy Tikhy, said that the operational goal of the Kursk counter-invasion is to protect Ukrainian civilians. Quote, Ukraine is not interested in taking over the Kursk region territory, but we want to protect the lives of our people. Just as a reminder, from the districts of the Kursk region, since the beginning of this summer alone, against Ukraine's Sumy region, there were over 2,000 attacks launched.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War Podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com/malcontentnews.
The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine announced the mandatory evacuation of 20,000 people in the Sumy Oblast who live within 10 kilometers of the 1991 state border with Russia and restrictions on movement 20 kilometers from the border. The decision was made due to the, quote, increase in the intensity of hostilities and in order to preserve the lives of the civilian population and military personnel. Data shows that almost half of the UMPK glide bombs Russia is attacking Ukraine with are targeting the Sumy Oblast. A missile strike on the city of Sumy damaged civilian infrastructure and a hospital. Power, water and gas were knocked out in some areas, with no casualties reported. In other parts of the Sumy region, Russian bombings and artillery strikes killed 1 civilian and wounded 4. In the Belgorod Oblast of Russia, Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov declared a, quote, regional emergency regime, saying that Belgorod authorities would ask Moscow to declare a federal emergency regime in the region. Quote, the introduction of these regimes is necessary in order to more effectively protect Belgorod residents and help victims, including with the participation of the federal budget. What that exactly means wasn't clarified. Drones constantly attack Shebekino, and rockets fired by HIMARS reportedly struck the settlement of Krasnaya Yaruga. Governor Gladkov confirmed the attack, but provided no further information. Let's not forget about my home. Here is what happened in Ukraine, starting in the Kharkiv Oblast. In the Lipsy-Vovchansk AO, fighting continued in Vovchansk and north of Tykhe, with no change in the situation. In the Gleboka area, a Russian assault with up to 6 up-armored total tanks supported by light infantry was repulsed by the Ukrainian 92nd Assault Brigade. Russian forces suffered heavy casualties and retreated. In the Kupiansk AO, Russian attempts to advance towards Sinkivka were repulsed, and assaults in the direction of Novoosinovo and Krugliakivka from occupied Pishchane were unsuccessful. Ukrainian forces continued to defend the southern part of Berestove. The head of the Kharkiv Oblast Military Administration, Oleg Sinyogubov, announced a 16-hour curfew in 201 settlements. The restrictions start at 1700 hours in the evening and end at 0900 hours in the morning. Quote, the decision was adopted to facilitate efficient work of the defense forces of Ukraine and to ensure the safety of civilians, since it's quite dangerous to live in these border areas. In the Luhansk Oblast, Russian forces continued their greatest hits on repeat, conducting assaults on the eastern edge of Makiivka and in the direction of Nevsky and Terny. None of the attacks were successful. Fighting was also reported in the eastern part of the Serebryansky forest. Now let's talk about the Donbass and the northeastern part of the Donetsk Oblast. In the Siverskaya, Russian attacks continued in the direction of Verkhnyokamyansk from Zolotarivka and the center of Spirne. There was no change in the situation. In the Kostantinivkaya, fighting continued on the western edges of the canal district of Chasiv Yar and in the forested area west of Ivanivska. Russian attempts to cross the Siversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal from Kurdyumivka in the direction of Bila Hora ended in failure. Ukrainian forces continued to hold their defensive lines in the Toretsk-New York AO, but the situation is very difficult. Russian attacks between Zalizne and Toretsk and near the center of New York continued, with new reports of Russian DRG in the eastern parts of Toretsk. Speaking with United States state media agency Radio Liberty, Alexander Bordian, acting press officer of the 32nd Separate Mechanized Brigade, said, quote, "As for the assaults, yes, the intensity has dropped a little bit, but it's not a very high delta. That is, it has not dropped significantly." Russian attempts to advance in the direction of Sukha Balka and subordinate attacks in the direction of Korenevo were unsuccessful. In southwestern Donetsk Oblast, Russian forces made small but tactically significant gains in the Pokrovskaya. Fighting continued on the eastern edge of Vozdvizhenka, north from occupied Novoalexandrivka in the direction of Zelena Pole, from occupied Timofeivka in the direction of Yelizavetivka, and on the eastern edge of Grodivka, where Russian forces made a small advance. Ukrainian source Deep State reported that Russian troops captured Ivanivka and Lysychne. From northern occupied Serhiivka, Russian forces made a small gain in the direction of Zhuravka. Russian attempts to advance in the direction of Mykolaiivka, Novozhelanne, Ptyche and Skuchne ended in failure. Fighting also continued in Zhelanne. In the Kurakhove, Ukrainian forces held their defensive positions in the eastern edge of Karlivka, along the Lozova River in Krasnogorivka and in southeastern Kostantinivka. Further south, in the Vuhledar AO, fighting was reported east of the T-532 highway near Vodyane and southeast of Vuhledar, with no change in the situation. I have news from the rest of Russia. Ukraine launched a massive attack with 117 one-way drones and 4 missiles. The Savasleika military airfield in the Nizhny Novgorod region and the Baltimore, not to be confused with Baltimore, Maryland, and Borisoglebsk military airfields in the Voronezh region were among the targets. NASA firms indicated that the rail yard at Savasleika was on fire. Russian propagandist fighter bomber reported there were hits at some bases with losses, but didn't specify which ones. Pictures shared on social media showed a large fire visible from the area of Malyshevo, overlooking the Baltimore airfield. Explosions thundered across Voronezh, and videos captured air defenses intercepting some drones. In Moscow, anti-Putin partisans burned down a cell phone tower near the Alabina railway station. Widespread power outages continued in the Republic of Dagestan after Rosatom shut down the Kursk nuclear power plant. Power has been out for 2 days, stranding tourists in Anapa. Power surges are damaging electrical equipment, with power lines sparking and transformers exploding in Yeysk. In Krasnodar Krai, over 70 electrical substations were knocked offline. Everything is going to plan, and let me look out my window. Nope, no nuclear war. David, any nuclear war in the United States?
Nope, no nuclear war here. We're still looking for it, but definitely no nuclear war here either.
And that's what we know. Your support of my home, Ukraine, helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You've been listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. To help keep us independent, please consider providing financial support by becoming a patron. Want on-demand news in your hand? Download the Google News app and make Malcontent News one of your favorites to receive breaking news updates. Thank you for listening.